We are finishing today the Shiva of Nachman Daniel, Zichrono Livracha, Ben ייבדל לחיים ארוכים, Aryeh Tzvi, Morris, our beloved student. We spoke the whole week. Of the desire that he had to continue to learn, to get unbelievably madrigos. I remember when I went on Monday, 9:30, to the house of Rav Ezer Shapira that took the house and went to another place. I want to thank him so the parents can be in the apartment, and I thank their parents that they are with us now. I really appreciate it. The chief rabbi came. And the father told me, you know, I thought that he will never live. He will stay here for years. Because he so much wanted to have desire and to go to unbelievably madrigos in learning and avodat Hashem. Having daf yomi, prepare vatikin every day. Ben adam lamakom and ben adam lechaver. We spoke last week that when things like that happen, yidagu kol bnei achabura, means that they have to be mitbonen on hashgachat Hashem, the way of Hashem in the Word. And I was thinking to myself, who can give us the most chizuk and the most deepness hitbonenut? It was clear to me immediately that it would be Rabbi Leff, the Rav of Matityahu, but more than that, well-known speaker in the whole world, that go from a place to a place in order to give unbelievably chizuk. Understanding what is our job now in tefillah, what is our job in avodat Hashem when something like that happens. And I really want to thank him tremendously for coming here, changing plans. He has a very busy schedule, and being with us. Before he gave to the Israeli students, and I stopped him in the middle, even that he asked a question and he wanted to give answers, but because you were waiting and the parents were here, I told Rabbi Leff that so all the students are waiting to discuss the question that Rabbi Leff asked. So I apologize that I'm going back to the Israelis in my room to continue what Rabbi Leff asked them. So I apologize for that. תודה רבה הרב לף, אנחנו מאוד מעריכים, יישר כוח גדול.
First, like to dedicate the Divrei Torah that I'll share with you. Le'ilu Nishmas Nachman Daniel ben Aryeh Tzvi u'Mirlana. Should be a schus Le'ilu Nishmas, so now at the end of Shiva. Start with a medrash that after I finish all that I want to tell you, you'll be able to understand this medrash very well. The Medrash says, Moshe Rabbeinu said, Ba'oz chatasi, with the word Oz I sinned, U'ba'oz ani mitakein, and I will correct my sin with the word Oz. After Moshe Rabbeinu's initial encounter with Paro, which ended in failure, things got worse for the Jewish people. Moshe Rabbeinu came with a complaint. Lama hareosa la'am hazel lama zeshlachtoni. Why did you do bad to these people? Why did you send me altogether? Ume'oz basi al Paro l'daber b'shmecha. From the time I came to Paro to speak in your name, heira la'am hazeh. Things just got worse for them. V'hasel lo hitzalta samecha. You didn't save them. So Moshe Rabbeinu said, I sinned with the word Oz, and I will correct with the word Oz. Where did Moshe Rabbeinu correct it? Oz Yashir Moshe. Two questions. First of all, if I had to pick a word from those two sentences of Moshe Rabbeinu's complaint against Hashem to symbolize his sin, I would not have picked the word Oz. I would have picked the word Lama. Why? That was Moshe's sin. Who are you to question the Ribono Shel Olam? And so secondly, it's the first word of what he said. It's the first word, and it symbolizes the sin. Why? That what I have said is the sin. Why did Chazal pick the first word of the second sentence? May Oz bosi el paro, and that represents Moshe's sin, the word Oz. And the second part of the Medrash is just as difficult. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't say Oz Yashir Moshe, the Torah said it. Moshe started with Ashir al Hashem. So Moshe didn't even say Oz Yashir. How did he correct the sin with the word Oz? File that away. When tragedies happen of the magnitude of what happened in Meron, so we begin to ask questions, whether we ask them verbally or we think about them. And those questions are the question that Moshe Rabbeinu himself asked after the Chet HaEgel, when Moshe saw that the Ribono Shel Olam was willing to forgive the Jewish people, and he realized it's Eis Ratzon, it's a time of goodwill from the Ribono Shel Olam, so he asked for things that he didn't ask for before. And one of them was, Hodi'eni et noa es drachecha, let me know your ways. And Chazal say, what was the intention? Lama yesh tzadik v'tov lo, v'tzadik v'ralo, v'rasha v'tov lo, v'rasha v'ralo. Why are there tzaddikim who suffer in this world, and tzaddikim who prosper? And why are there Rishayim who prosper and Rishayim that suffer? Now on the surface, Moshe Rabbeinu asked too many questions. Doesn't bother me if tzaddikim prosper and Rishayim suffer. What bothers me is that Rishayim prosper and tzaddikim suffer. So why did Moshe Rabbeinu ask all four and not just two of them that bothered him? So I think the real answer is that if all tzaddikim would suffer in this world and all Rishayim would prosper, so it wouldn't be a question. We just have to understand what this world is all about. This world is a world where tzaddikim are supposed to suffer and Rishayim are supposed to prosper. But since we see there are tzaddikim who prosper, then why are there tzaddikim who suffer? And we see there are Rishayim who suffer, then why are there Rishayim who prosper? That is a question. But I want to tell you a different answer. The tells the Rosh Yeshiva of Yosef Yehuda Leib Bloch in Shurei Das explains the following pasuk: Ishbar lo yeda uchesil lo yovin ezos. An ignorant person doesn't know, and a fool doesn't know this. It says everyone is ignorant of many things. It's not a busha, it's not an embarrassment to be a bar, to be a person who's ignorant. But a kshil is a fool, and that's embarrassing to be a fool. An ish bar admits he doesn't know. A kshil is a person who says, I don't know this. I'll give you an example. Imagine a senator in America who's responsible to okay appropriations for NASA space control. If he okays the appropriation, they get the money. If he doesn't, they don't get the money. And he doesn't know too much about electronics. He knows basically how to turn on his transistor radio. That's about it. He walks into NASA space control, and he doesn't want people to think he's ignorant. So he walks over to one very complicated electronic machine, and he says, I don't understand why you need this piece of equipment. And until someone explains it to me, you're not getting funding for it. That's a fool. The rest of the room you do understand. Just that one thing you don't understand, everything else in the room you do, that's a fool. A person who says, I can't believe in God because of the Holocaust. Everything else in this world you understand. From the beginning of Bereshit till now, everything you understand. The only thing you don't understand is the Holocaust. That's a fool. I never in my experience as a Rav, had somebody come to me after davening very upset, say, Rabbi, I have to speak to you immediately. He sits down and he says, Rabbi, I woke up this morning, I'm healthy, my wife is healthy, my children are healthy, Baruch Hashem, I'm making a very, very fine parnasa, and I don't understand why God is doing this to me. Nobody ever asked me that question. And many times people come to me and say, I'm not healthy, my wife's not healthy, my children aren't, I'm not making a living, why is God doing this to me? Somehow when things are going okay, we trust the Ribono Shel Olam, that He knows what He's doing. When unfortunately things go the way that we don't want them to go, then we ask the question. Moshe Rabbeinu was not exil. He wasn't a fool. So he said, Ribono Shel Olam, I'm not only asking you what bothers me, but I don't understand anything. And there's a mitzvah to understand whatever we can of Darkei Hashem. So Ribono Shel Olam explained to me, Tzadik v'tovlo, v'tzadik v'ralo. Rosha v'tovlo and Rosha v'ralo. And that's the way that we'll speak about this topic, not to speak about it because the things that bother us, but to try to understand as much as we can of Darkei Hashem. The Chovos HaLevavos says that even though we have free choice, we don't have free reign over this world. We don't control the world just because the Ribono Shel Olam gave us free choice. And therefore a person is rewarded and punished basically for the choices he makes, but whether he can bring those choices to fruition is not necessarily in his control. I'll give you two very simple examples. Person makes up his mind that he wants to give $1,000 to an Oni the next morning by davening. He writes out a check, puts it under his pillow. Next morning, he's going to give this $1,000 to the Oni and Mekayim the mitzvah of tzedakah. He made a very good choice. Can he guarantee that he'll carry that out? No. He may drop dead that night. He won't be able to give the tzedakah in the morning. The Oni may drop dead. The Oni may win the lottery overnight and become an usher. Can't give him tzedakah anymore. The banks may all fail and the check will be worthless. A million things can happen that will prevent him from carrying out his good decision. HaKadosh Baruch Hu will give him schar for making the decision. It's up to the Ribono Shel Olam if he wants that Oni to get that money or not. That's Ratzon Hashem. Whether sometimes he'll be able to fulfill it, megalgalin schus al yedei zakai, and sometimes the Ribono Shel Olam will prevent him from doing it for whatever reasons he has. Same thing, somebody wants to assassinate somebody. Gets the gun ready, gets his getaway car ready to do it in the morning. The guy will drop dead overnight. Or the guy he wants to kill can drop dead overnight, and he won't be able to kill him anymore. Or the gun may misfire. There are a lot of things that can happen that are not in that person's control. He'll get an onesh for making that decision, and whether he carries it out or not is up to the Ribono Shel Olam. Sometimes megalgalin chov al yedei chayiv, that does not exempt the person from a punishment. He's going to get punished because he would have carried it out had it not been for circumstances beyond his control. But if the Ribono Shel Olam wants him to carry it out, so that's Ratzon Hashem. That's the Ribono Shel Olam's doing. It's not the person's doing. His intention was evil. And sometimes the Ribono Shel Olam will prevent him from carrying out because that's Ratzon Hashem. So if that's the case, that everything that happens in this world, good or bad, is Ratzon Hashem, that means that if a suicide bomber gets on a bus and blows himself up with 200 innocent men, women, and children, that's Ratzon Hashem. Because the Ribono Shel Olam could have prevented it. He could have made the bomber blow up before he got on the bus. He could have made the bomb not go off. He could have made the people not get on the bus. But he didn't. So that means ultimately that was Ratzon Hashem. So everything that happens in this world, even through the agency of people's free choice, is Ratzon Hashem. So then we have a big problem, because it says in the Shulchan Aruch that we're supposed to believe that Kol ma da'ovid Rachmana l'tav ovid. Everything that Ribono Shel Olam does is for the good. And I'm telling you now that everything that happens is what Ribono Shel Olam's doing. So everything's for the good. How could that be? How could 200 innocent people blown up in a bus be for the good? How could tragedies like Meron be for the good? How could that be? Shagafayel Mendelovich, the Rashiv in Torah Vadas, about 100 years ago, said the following. Chana, in her tefillah after she had Shmuel, says, Ein sur kelokeinu. There is no rock like Hashem. So the Gemara says in Brachas, Al tikret sur el sayar. There's no artist like Hashem. And the Gemara says a regular artist can paint a picture, he can't put a neshama into it. Kadosh Baruch Hu paints a picture called a body and he puts a neshama, so he's the greatest artist. Shagafayel said once the Gemara compares Hashem to an artist, we can take the comparison a little bit further. And we can say the following. Take a kindergarten child and tell him to draw the picture of a person standing in front of him. So what does he do? He draws a circle for the head, a line down for the body, 2 lines out for arms, 2 lines down for legs, 2 dots for eyes, a dot for a nose, big smile, and he's finished. And you know exactly what he's drawing every step along the way. Now tell Rembrandt to draw the same picture, paint the same painting. So Rembrandt dabs a little red paint on the canvas and then a little black paint on the canvas. Somebody who knows nothing about art says to Rembrandt, Mr. Rembrandt, you just ruined this canvas. Red, black. I'll bring you another canvas. Start with the circle and let's get finished. So Rembrandt will tell him, you know nothing about art. Have a seat and keep your mouth shut. In 6 months, I will finish this painting. If at the end of 6 months, when you see the whole painting, you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer it. What's going to be at the end of 6 months? You'll see the whole painting, and you'll see that the black was needed for a shadow, and the red was needed for contrast, and everything beautifully fits into the picture that the artist is painting. So too, says Rav Shagafayel, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is painting a panorama of history. And we're in the middle of the picture, and we have a lot of questions. We see a lot of black blotches and red blotches and terrible tragedies throughout Jewish history and in people's personal lives. And we have a lot of questions. Why is the Rebbeinu Shem ruining this tremendous panorama of history? But if we could see the whole painting, and the painting is not just this world. The painting is this world and the next world, and Ad Tchias HaMeisim. If we could see the whole picture, we could see that everything HaKadosh Baruch Hu does ultimately is for the good. So therefore, Ein Sayer Kelokeinu, the Rebbeinu Shem is the ultimate artist. He's painting a tremendous panorama of history. We're in the middle of the painting and we have a lot of questions. But if we could see the whole picture, we'd see that everything fits in to that painting and everything is for the good. Imagine the following. You walk into the following scene. There's a masked man ready to cut off somebody's leg. So you assume this is a terrorist attack, and you want to save this poor victim. So you knock out the masked man, and you drag the victim to safety, and you expect a tremendous yasher koach. And the victim looks up at you and he says, why did you do that? My doctor said I had gangrene, and I needed my leg amputated immediately or I would die. Why did you burst into the operating room, knock out my doctor, and pull me out of there? Now I'm going to die because of you. But you thought was a terrorist attack because you didn't know the whole picture was really an act of mercy in an operating room. If you don't see the whole picture, you can totally distort and misunderstand what's going on. The Chafetz Chaim says this in a very humorous way. There's a pasuk that if you know the whole pasuk, there's no problem with it. Shomer Hashem eskolu avov v'eskol harishoyim yashmid. Hashem protects all those that He loves, and He'll destroy all the rishoyim. No problem hashkafically with that pasuk. What happens if you never heard that pasuk in your life, and you walked into shul one day late, and you hear them saying with great kavana, eskolo havov v'eskol harishoyim yashmid? What do you mean? Why is God going to destroy all the people that He loves? And you walk out perplexed. Or you never heard that pasuk, and you went to shul, and you left early, and you heard, Shomer Hashem eskolu avov v'eskol harishoyim. God's going to protect all those that He loves, and all the rishoyim too. Why would He do that? Says the Chafetz Chaim, we come late to this world, and we leave early. And we only see a portion of what's going on. And we have a lot of questions. But if we could see the whole picture from the beginning of Brias HaOlam till the end, then we'd know that everything really is for the good. The Knaf Rananim, a parish on Perek Shira, gives the following marshal. Same idea. There was a city slicker that came to the farm for the first time in his life. And he sees a farmer carrying what appears to him to be breakfast cereal in his two hands. And he figures these farmers are really really primitive people, right? Why is he carrying the cereal in his hands? So he figures he's probably going to eat breakfast, and he doesn't have a box to put the cereal in. Sees the farmer goes to a place in his field which is all muddy, and he throws the cereal into the mud and covers it with his foot. He says, this guy is really out of his mind. He says to the farmer, you know, where we come from, in the city, we eat that cereal. We don't throw it into the mud. The farmer says, I see you've never been on a farm in your life. Meet me here 6 months from now, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. 6 months later, he comes and he sees where the farmer threw the cereal, the seeds, is growing now wheat 20 times as much as what he threw into the mud. He says, well, the farmer's not so stupid. Now he's going to have a really big breakfast. He sees the farmer starts cutting down the wheat, and instead of going and eating it, he starts beating the kernels. He says, what did the kernels do to you? You have to beat them. Then he makes them into a powder. He says, maybe he doesn't have teeth. He has to eat this powder. He says he doesn't take the powder and eat it. He mixes it with water and gets some kind of paste. It looks disgusting. And then he takes the paste and starts burning it in an oven. He says, the guy's really crazy. Why is he taking out his frustrations on this wheat? And then he sees the bread. If you don't see the whole process, you can assume that parts of the process are very negative and destructive. But when you see the whole process, you know that all of it goes into making that bread. It's all a very positive process, but we don't see the final results. Another example. When I was a rabbi in Miami in the 1970s, so there was a terrible plane crash in Chicago. The worst air disaster in the United States up until that point. A jet took off with hundreds of people on it, and one of the engines fell off the wing. It didn't stop working, it fell off the wing. A plane can't fly like that. It went up in the air, and within a few minutes came down and crashed, and everybody was killed. And I remember seeing a story in the Miami Herald about the following woman who was supposed to be was on that plane. The story went like this. The woman had a family reunion to get to, and if she missed this plane, she would miss that family reunion. And she wanted very much to get to her family reunion, and she was only on standby. She didn't have a reservation. So she kept going to the gate, to the desk, and asking the woman there, can I get on the plane? And they would tell her, lady, we have to wait till we close the gate, and if somebody doesn't show up, you are first on the standby list, you can get on the plane, but we can't tell you now, so sit down, have some patience, and right before we're ready to take off, we'll let you know if we can get on the plane or not. And she had no patience. Every 2 minutes she would come up, can I get on now? A man who had a reservation on the plane, was supposed to go to a business meeting, said to himself, if I miss this plane, I'll take the next plane out. They'll reschedule the business meeting. But this woman really wants to get on this plane. So he went over to her and he said, I'm giving you my reservation on the plane. I'll take your standby. If I get on, fine. If not, nishkaferlach. But I see you really want to get to this family reunion, so I'm willing to give up my reservation. At that moment, the man thought he was doing somebody else a favor and inconveniencing himself, and this woman thought this is her lucky day. How long did it take before it was obvious that this was not her lucky day? She got to her family reunion, but not the one she thought she was going to. And the man saved his own life. How long did it take? 10 minutes? 15 minutes? If you don't see the whole picture, you can totally distort things and see bad as good and good as bad. And the Gemara in Psachim says, V'hoya Hashem l'melech al kol ha'oretz bayom ahu yiyeh Hashem echad u'shmo echad. On that day, Hashem will be one and His name one. So the Gemara asks a very simple question, and now God isn't one? only then he'll be one? Says the Gemara, Lo k'olam hazeh olam haba. This world is not like the next world. Ba'olam hazeh al hatov mevorech hatov ha'meitiv. V'al hara mevorech dayin ho'emes. On good things we say hatov ha'meitiv, and on bad things we say dayin ho'emes. But in the next world, it's all hatov ha'meitiv. Says the Tzlach, that doesn't mean that in this world there's good and bad, and next world there's only good. Because then what does it have to do with the bracha? But everything that we made a dayin ho'emes in this world, and here we saw it as bad, when we get to the next world and look back, we'll be able to understand that everything really is for the good. And even on those things that we made a dayin ho'emes in this world, we'll make a bara hatov ha'meitiv in the next world, looking back. And this is what the Rebbeinu Shalom told Moshe Rabbeinu according to the Ksav Sofer. V'ro'i sa'achorai. Moshe, you want to know why the tzaddikim will suffer and why the reshoyim will prosper. V'ro'i sa'achorai. In retrospect, when the world will reach its completion and you'll look back, you'll understand everything. But uponai lo yero. But you won't be able to understand it looking ahead. Looking ahead is impossible. Rav Shamshon Furl says that the answer is from a different pasuk. Hinei makom iti. The Rebbeinu Shalom says to Moshe Rabbeinu, if you want to come up here and see things from my perspective, above time, so then there's no questions. But if you want to stay down there and see things from your perspective, limited by time, then there are no answers. So basically what we're saying is that everything is for the good, but we don't see it. And therefore the Shari Tshuva says that when a person goes through a tzara and he's saved from it, and he wants to thank the Rebbeinu Shalom for the Yeshua, he shouldn't thank him only for the saving, he should thank him for the tzara too. Because at that point he can realize that if the Rebbeinu Shalom brought that tzara, there must have been a good reason why he needed it. And we think, perhaps, that when the world will reach its completion, we'll need hours, days, years of shiurim to explain all the tzaras of Klal Yisrael, all the pogroms and the Holocaust, and all the personal tzaras, and the Meron tragedy too, and we'll need hours, months, years of explanation. Says the Chafetz Chaim, no, there's a precedent. There were 10 brothers that innocently went down to Mitzrayim to buy food in the famine, like everybody else, and all of a sudden they're accused of being spies, they're thrown into prison, then they're sent home, and their money appears in their sacks, and they're sent to get their little brother, and he's accused of being a thief, and nothing makes any sense. And they figure someday somebody's going to explain this to us. It may take weeks to understand all the different details. And the truth is, 2 words answered all their questions. Ani Yosef. When Yosef revealed himself, everything made sense. So too, says the Chafetz Chaim, one day the Rebbeinu Shalom will reveal himself and reveal the whole plan, and we'll see the whole picture. And he'll say, Ani Hashem, and everything will become very, very clear in that one moment. We'll see the picture, we'll be able to understand how everything fits in to that picture. I'm going to tell you one more mashal, and you'll see from that mashal that everything I told you until now, if you don't understand how to answer the question I'm going to raise from this mashal, is absurd. So I think I drilled into your head that this is true, that everything Hashem does is for the good. We just don't see it because we don't see the whole picture. But let me tell you this mashal, and you'll see how ridiculous that is. The mashal is brought down in the Parshas Yosef, in the end of Parshas Shmos. There was a tzaddik in a certain city that was experiencing a terrible tzara, the worst tzara it ever had in its history. And this tzaddik was known that whenever he davened that tzara should go away, it immediately went away. And this tzaddik was dying. And the Rav of the city went to the tzaddik, and he said to him, we know that tzaddikim have more power after they leave this world than when they had it in this world. If your power of tefillah was so strong in this world, imagine what it's going to be after you go to the next world. So I want you to promise me that the first thing you do after you leave this world is to go before the Kisei HaKavod and beg Hashem to take away this sorrow from our city. And the tzaddik promised him, and he died. And a week went by and the sorrow got worse, and another week it got even worse. And after 2 weeks, the tzaddik came to the Rav in a dream. And he said to him, I know that you're perplexed. What happened to me? Why am I not davening that this sorrow should go away? He said, but you should know from where I am now in the Olam HaEmes, that sorrow is the best thing that could ever happen to the city. I can't daven that good things go away. If you see it as a sorrow, you daven. I can't. If that's the case, then why do we daven? Don't we believe what I just told you? Everything is really for the good, but we don't see it. So Rahman al-Islam, a person gets sick. Why does he come to the Ribono Shel Olam and say, Rifa'einu Hashem v'nei rofei, God, I'm sick. Please make me well. Why doesn't Hashem turn around and say, I know you're sick. I made you sick. Nothing happens in this world that I'm not involved in. And I made you sick for a good reason. Your neshama needs that. That's what's best for you. L'netzach nitzachim. So why would we want to daven that good things should go away? And even if we're not so smart, and we daven that good things should go away, why would Hashem want to listen? Imagine a person sick in the hospital. The doctor examines them. And the doctor says that they need a very invasive, painful operation. But if they have the operation, they'll live another 50 happy, healthy years for sure. And if they don't have the operation, they will die within 2 hours for sure. How do I know for sure? Because I made up the mashal. I can make up the mashal any way I want. Black and white. Operation, 50 happy, healthy years. No operation, the person dies within two hours. And the patient looks up at the doctor and says, Doctor, I don't like pain. It hurts, so please don't give me the operation. Begs the doctor, please don't give me the operation. If you were the doctor, would you listen to them? Of course not. You know this operation is the best thing. They'll recover from it. They'll live 50 happy, healthy years, right? The person is not so smart. Right now he's looking at just the pain he's going to have now. But the doctor knows that in the bigger picture, this is what's best for that person. He's not going to listen to the person and do something not good for him. So why would HaKadosh Baruch Hu want to listen to our davening? Because we don't believe in all this? Because we're not so smart? HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows that everything is for the good. And this is for our eternal good. Why do we daven? The answer is my marshal is not such a good marshal. The real marshal would be the following. Let's go back to the hospital. Doctor examined the patient and concludes that they need a invasive and painful operation, but the operation will bring them 50 happy, healthy years. But the doctor says, it's a shame that the patient is so weak because his body is not capable of ingesting the drug that I have that could do the same thing as the operation. Very bitter medicine, but you need a stronger body to be able to integrate it. If the person would just be a little bit stronger, I could get away with this bitter medicine. Not only that, if his body would really be strong, I could cure this problem with a sweet medicine. Patient hears that. Doctor goes to prep for the operation. And during that time, the patient begins to make sit-ups, pull-ups on the chains above the bed, exercising and strengthening his body. Doctor comes back in an hour. He re-examines the patient, and he says, wow, patient's body is much stronger. I can get away with the bitter medicine. He doesn't need the operation anymore. Patient says, Doc, go back for another hour. Come back. I'm going to do some more exercise. Just give me the sweet medicine. What changed here? The doctor changed his mind? No. Doctor knew condition A, operation, condition B, bitter medicine, condition C, sweet medicine. What changed was the patient's condition. Under condition A, the best thing for that patient was the operation. But under a different condition, what's best for that patient is something else. On Rosh Hashanah, we wish each other a Shana Tova Umesuka. Every year is good. The worst year is a good year, because ultimately it's for the good, but it's not sweet sometimes. Sometimes our condition necessitates bitterness to bring that good about. So we want a year that's good, but not just good, but sweet too. And therefore, Reb Shamshon Raphael Hirsch says, Lehispalel doesn't change God's mind. It's Hispa'el. It's reflective. It reflects on the person. It changes the person davening, amongst other things. Mitzvahs and Torah and Shinui Hashem and Shinui Makom. All different kinds of changes can change a person's condition. Under one condition, what's best for that person, L'netzach Netzachim, is X. But if he changes his condition, then something sweeter can happen. So therefore, we daven not to change Hashem's mind. We daven to change our condition. And under different conditions, the good can come in a sweeter way, or it can come, unfortunately, sometimes in a bitter way. And it's not cause and effect. You daven and everything changes. Sometimes the change is not enough. Sometimes it's not the change in where that change is necessary. If the person would have exercised his finger, he'd have fine finger muscles, but his machla is in his stomach. It's not going to help. But it's a possibility. It's one factor amongst many that can change the condition of the person. Person davens, he becomes a different person. There's only one problem with that. I'll give you the marshal and you'll see what the problem is. Let's go back to the hospital. Doctor examines the patient, needs a invasive operation, but if he exercises and strengthens his body, he may get away with bitter or sweet medicine. I'm standing by the bed of my best friend, and I say, Doc, this guy's half dead. He can't exercise anything. He can't even move his fingers. But I'm his best friend, and I have a gym in my home. I'm going home now, putting his name on the wall, and I'm going to exercise for him. So in an hour, right, don't give him the operation, just give him the bitter medicine. I promise you, I'm doing all the exercise for him. Obviously, it's not going to help. So I understand, according to what I told you, how you can daven for yourself. But how can you daven for somebody else? How can you daven and make somebody else's condition change? You can change. How can you make somebody else change? So one answer is following. Give you a marshal to it also. When I was a child, a few years ago, I had problems swallowing pills. I gagged on them. I couldn't swallow a pill. So my parents had to take pills when they had to take them, an aspirin or something, and they had to put it into my juice or crush it into my cereal, and that's how I was able to take the medicine. Baruch Hashem, I've graduated from that. I can take 8, 9 pills every morning with no problem. I had a son who had the same problem, but medicine had advanced, and they made a lot of different medicines in liquid form, liquid aspirin and so on. And he got away easily. He could take the liquid form of the medicine. One time he had an infection on his toe, and the doctor said the only antibiotic that is effective for that infection has to be taken in pill form, and it can't be diluted. You can't put it in the juice, and you can't put it in the cereal. He has to take it whole. The whole pill has to swallow it whole. Big pill. So I told my son, Shlomi, every time we try to accommodate you and give you the liquid version of the medicine, there is no liquid version. It's a big pill. You're going to have to take it. If you can't take it, I'm going to sit on you and open your mouth physically, forcibly, and your mother's going to throw the pill down your throat. He said, Tati, this is ridiculous. My toe is infected. What are you chapping my throat? My throat is perfectly okay. Take the pill, put it on my toe. You don't have to put it in my mouth. My mouth is okay. It's a good question for a 5-year-old. What's the answer? It's not your toe and your mouth. It's you. What goes into your mouth goes into your digestive system, eventually goes into your circulatory system, and the blood brings it to the place that's infected and cures you. Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh Bazeh. All Jews are related, not related, but interrelated. We're all part of one neshama, and therefore what affects one person affects other people too. And therefore I can exercise for you because my exercise changes you to a certain degree too. And you can understand with that what Chazal say, that if I need something and somebody else needs the same thing, and instead of davening for myself, I daven for you, then I'm answered first. So we normally understand because I'm such a nice person. I need that thing. I have a cold. I could daven that I should get better, but you have a cold. I daven for you to get better. So I'm such a nice person. But usually that nice person knows this Gemara. So I'm davening for you, so I should be answered first. So I'm not such a nice person. So why does it work? Very simply. Because if when I daven, it makes enough of an indirect change in you, it's surely the change in me is much more direct. So I get answered first. If an indirect change in you can happen through my davening, because we're all connected, so a change in me, which is direct, is surely a much greater change, so I'm going to be answered first. So that is how we daven. In order that bad situations that could change because the situation and the condition of the person changes. But why do we mourn? Rahmanul Itzlan, somebody dies, and we mourn. Family just got up from Shiva. They're misabel. Why? Why don't we say, well, if we believe all of this, and everything really is for the good, and anybody who's affected is also affected for the good, so why mourn? Why don't we rejoice? Rabbanu Shalom, I believe it's the best thing that could be. Give me an example. There was a guy named Chanoch. He lived way back in the beginning of the world, and he died at the tender young age of 365, when everybody else was living to be 900. That means proportionately, he died in his 20s, proportionate to today's lifespan. And I'm sure in his levaya, everybody was crying. Terrible. Poor Chanoch didn't even get to start living, only 365, all these 900-year-old people crying their eyes out. But we know now why Chanoch died at that tender young age of 365. Rashi tells us, Chanoch was a tzaddik gomer, 100% tzaddik. He lived in a generation before the Mabul of Rishoyim. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu was afraid that if he'd live longer, he may be influenced a little bit. He wouldn't die 100% tzaddik, just a 99.99% tzaddik. What difference did it make? Because he died a tzaddik gomer, HaKadosh Baruch Hu took his neshama and transformed it into the greatest malach that exists, the malach Metatron. God's right-hand man, Kibiyach. If he had lived another 600 years, he'd still be dead now about 5 times. And he wouldn't be Metatron. So the fact that the Rebbeinu Shalom took him early was L'netzach Nitzachim, to the benefit of Chanoch. But they didn't know that then. So they mourned and cried for Chanoch. But l'chara, if they really believe what I said, why should they cry? And some people say that that's really the way you should be. Shouldn't cry, shouldn't mourn. Mishnah says, Kishem shemevorech al hara, kach atova, kach mevorech al hara. Just like you make a bracha on good, you make a bracha on bad. The Gemara says that doesn't mean you make the same bracha, because we don't. On good we make a tova native, and on bad we make a dayan ho'emes. Ela lekublinu b'simcha. You should make the dayan ho'emes with the same simcha that you make a tova native. And there are those that say, well, that's what it means. If we really be on the right madrega, when you make a dayan ho'emes at a funeral, you should make it b'simcha. That's absurd. I've been at plenty of funerals in my life, personal and congregational. I never saw anybody make a dayan ho'emes b'simcha unless he didn't like the person who died. People mourn, they cry. Gedolei Yisrael cry. And the Ramban says that somebody who doesn't cry and doesn't mourn is an achzor, it's cruelty. So why do we cry? Why don't we understand that everything can change, so everything is ultimately for the good? So why don't we rejoice? It's for the good. In order to understand that, I'll give you the following idea. We live in a world where we function on 2 levels. One level called emes and one called emes lamito. Absolute truth and relative truth. I'll give you a marshal to what that means. You're aware that in every cubic centimeter of air and water, there are millions of microorganisms, right? Microscopic beings that are floating around the air. If you would take an electron microscope and magnify the air in front of us 1,000,000 times, you'd see monsters floating in the air, mamish, with fangs and legs and mamish, look like monsters. And they're alive. So every time you breathe in, especially if you breathe through your mouth, you are ingesting these monsters, and they're not kosher. So why don't we have to wear a B'nai Brak sifter on our mouths and noses so we don't ingest these shrotzim? The answer is very simple. Lo nitna haTorah l'malachi hashoresh. Torah was given to human beings, and we have to relate to the Torah through our 5 senses. And something that is impossible for us to see with our 5 senses doesn't exist halachically. And it's 100% okay to look through an electron microscope, see this monster waving at us, and breathe in and ingest him. There's no issue according to anyone. 100% okay. Because absolutely it's there. But relative to our senses, which halacha depends on, it's not there. I'll give you one more example. We speak about sunrise and sunset. We all know that the sun doesn't rise and the sun doesn't set. The earth turns. Okay? Pretty much everybody understands that. So why didn't the Rebbeinu Shalom know that? It says in the Torah, in Tanakh, Mizrach Shemesh ad Mevo'o, from sunrise to sunset. Didn't the Rebbeinu Shalom know the sun doesn't rise and the sun doesn't set? But I tell you, last time I was in New York, about a year ago, I saw the weather page of the New York Times, and it said there, sunrise at this time and sunset at this time. Didn't anybody tell the people of the New York Times that the sun doesn't rise and the sun doesn't set? Should have said, earth turn morning, earth turn evening. The song, sunrise, sunset, should be earth turn, earth turn. So why do we talk about sunrise and sunset? Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us 5 senses, and there is no way with those 5 senses to feel the earth turning and not see a sunrise and sunset. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to relate to it as we see it with our senses, relative truth, even though the absolute truth is not like that. The absolute truth is that the earth is turning. But we relate to it not as malachim, but as human beings. So too, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to see things limited by time and not to see them in the whole picture. And when you see them limited by time, they're mournful and they appear to be bad. And they're things that can bring us to sympathize and empathize. And sometimes a person has to cry, and that's what's good for the neshama. And that which makes it good eternally is the fact that we go through this tzara on the interim. It's the tzara itself that somehow is good for our neshama. It's good for our neshama to empathize and sympathize with others, and to mourn and to feel bad. And that in itself is a catharsis for our neshamos. And that's why there's a mitzvah to mourn. And somebody who doesn't mourn is not getting the benefit that this tzara can bring in the ultimate good. And that's what it means, l'kublinu b'simcha. It doesn't mean that Rahman al-Islam, when a person goes through a tzara, he should click his heels and say, thank God, this is great, chas v'shalom. That's cruelty. But a person has to have an operation, and it hurts, and they're sick, but they know the operation will give them 50 happy, healthy years. So they're not clicking their heels, they're crying because the operation hurts. But deep down they have a certain satisfaction that I know that the hurt is for a purpose. Something good is going to come from this hurt. I'm not rejoicing, I'm crying, and it hurts. But I have a certain inner satisfaction that there's a reason why this hurt ultimately is for my good. That's how a person has to feel. He has to feel that the tzara is a tzara. And if the Rebbeinu Shalom wanted us to see the ultimate good in it, he wouldn't have made us limited by time. He wants us to cry, and He wants us to see the tzara. But from that we should have an inner emunah and bitachon that it's all for our good. So how do you get the benefit from a tzara? How do you cry, but at the same time have that inner bitachon and emunah? So Chazal say, Roe Adam Yisurim Boyim Alav. If somebody sees suffering descending upon them, so they should try to use it in a positive way. Yefashpesh b'maisav, yemashmesh b'maisav. Look and observe what you can improve and correct, and use it as an incentive to grow and to do better. Don't take it stoically, cry, but ask yourself, what can I do to change the situation, to use this in a positive way, to grow from it, to be strengthened, to correct things. And in such a situation, in order to know for the tzibur what the purpose of this, what are we supposed to understand from it, you need a Navi to tell you that. Today we don't have Nevi'im. We have Gedolei Yisrael and Chacham Adif Mi Navi. So a Gadol B'Yisrael can tell us not why it happened, but what the tzibur needs to use to be able to grow and change their situation for the better by using the tzara as an incentive. But each person individually should ask themselves, if I'm affected and it hurts me, and there's a pain here, and there's a great pain, and I feel terrible, so what can I do to change my situation and use this tzara in a positive way? And that's what Chazal say, Yefashpesh b'maisav, Yemashmesh b'maisav. Let's go back to the medrash that we started with. Moshe Rabbeinu comes to the Ribono Shel Olam after his unsuccessful mission to Paro, and he says, Lama hareyosa la'am hazeh, lama zeh shlachtani. Why did you do bad to these people? Why did you send me? The word lama does not mean the same thing as madua. Madua comes from the word das, intellectual question. God, why did you do this? Explain to me intellectually. That kind of question you don't ask. But when sorrows happen, you do ask questions. Lama, for what purpose? Lema, for what purpose did you do bad to these people? For what purpose did you send me? And you're supposed to ask that question. That's not a sin. When sorrows happen, you're not supposed to take it stoically. You're supposed to feel the pain and use it in a positive way and understand for what purpose am I experiencing this sorrow? What can it do to make me a better person, to strengthen me? So that was not the sin. That pasuk was perfect. Lama harei osalam hazeh. The sin started with the word me'oz. Why? Moshe Rabbeinu took a moment, an oz, and he isolated it. And he asked questions on the Ribono Shel Olam from that. Me'oz basi al Paro. From that moment that I came to Paro, things are bad. But that's not how you look at tzaras. You have to realize that we only see it as a tzara because we don't see the whole picture. But if you put it in the perspective of eternity, then I believe that really it's for the good. So Moshe Rabbeinu's chait was, he took an oz, a moment, and he isolated it and treated it in a vacuum instead of putting it into the panorama, into the perspective of eternity. How did he correct that? When it came to singing the Shira by Yabsu, Moshe Rabbeinu could have said, wow, this is great because right now it's great. Jewish people are saved, the Egyptians are drowned. But he didn't. The Torah is made, Oz Yoshir Moshe. Moshe took that Oz, that moment that was very, very good at the moment. But he didn't look at it and isolate it in time. But he put it in the perspective, Ad Tchias HaMesim, Rashi says. Oz Yoshir Moshe. He projected it into the future. I'm not thanking you, Ribono Shel Olam, because right now it looks good. but I'm projecting you because I believe that it's good, la'osid lavo too, it's good, ad netzach nesachim. And that corrected the hate that he started with. From all of this, on the one hand, we have to function in two ways. We have to feel real tsar and sympathy and empathy for the family that are mourning. And niftar echad mechabura, yida kol chabura. All of you here, and all of Klal Yisrael basically, are part of the family that are mourning, because you all have a very close kesher. And therefore you should take it in a way that, what can I improve, what can I do? And that's a tremendous zechus le'ilu nishmasa, that their memory should induce people to grow and to change for the better. That's how you have to look at it. At the same time, you have to have tremendous emunah and bitachon, that we see it the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to see it. And we have to have a pain, and we have to cry, and we have to feel terrible, and we have to look at it as a tragedy. At the same time, inwardly, we have to have lekublinu b'simcha. We have to have that inner satisfaction of knowing that everything HaKadosh Baruch Hu does ultimately is for the good. And if we could see the whole picture, we know that ein hachinami, this is the best thing that could ever be, l'netzach nitzachim. You have to balance out those two feelings, and if you do, then that will be a nechama for the family, a nechama for Klal Yisrael, and a tremendous ilui for those neshamos that were lost, that for their neshamos, this was something that they needed for their betterment, l'netzach nitzachim, in a way that was no way that anyone could ever understand, except HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And in that way, there'll be a kapara, and Yirtzeh Hashem will be able to see the full picture, b'vias goel tzedek m'herav yameinu.